All right, well, thanks for tuning in to episode 1 of Gongaga Radio.
I know, the inaugural podcast.
Yeah, just the podcast about us talking about the game we love, right?
Yeah.
It's essentially the reason for the creation of it.
It's true. I mean, I anticipate that we'll probably be branching out because, Final Fantasy VII is just such a good springboard into, video games in our lifespan.
Yeah, it's true.
The last 30 years. So, but yeah. If you're here for Final Fantasy VII talk, welcome. And if you're not, then boy, you're in for a bad time.
Yeah, you're going to be disappointed, I'm afraid. But now seemed like the perfect time to starting a Final Fantasy VII themed podcast.
Yeah.
Just with the remake coming out. Mm-hmm. Well, the 3 parts of the remake coming out, rather.
Maybe we should date this as episode 1. So at this point, we're 3-4 months away from remake part 2, Rebirth.
Yeah, Rebirth. Yeah. What is it? February 29th?
Yeah, it's the end of February.
Yeah, interesting leap year too.
Yeah. Well. Like a new calendar, man. But we've had decades to talk about Final Fantasy VII, and then a few years now to kind of sit on and go over 7 remake. I think really the impetus for this podcast, like the moment that I thought back on where I was like, yeah, this will work, is you and I basically raced to finish remake when it came out. Like we both did it in like 3 days.
Yeah.
That was some hardcore adult video gaming. don't have time for that too often these days. But when we finished, I have this memory of like going through the credits, and we were just texting like paragraphs to each other. Back and forth. I wish I still had those texts because like we were just writing an essay in 2 parts.
Yeah, there's just so much to digest with that game, right? Because we've had so many conversations. We could have filled up multiple podcasts of just us talking about Final Fantasy VII alone. And I think that's the perfect intro into the podcast, really, is just like talking about our first experiences, talking about what Final Fantasy VII really meant to us, just because it was such an influential game in so many ways.
Yeah. So I think that's a good starting point, and I'm gonna let you lead off just because my story of playing Final Fantasy VII starts with you bringing me the copy in our late teens. So
yeah, and I guess I never really thought about how different our experiences getting into Final Fantasy VII was, because I remember growing up and just watching my brother play through it, and I truly didn't know what was going on. I was 7, 8, 9, 10 around that time, and it was just I was fascinated with Barrett because he had a gun for an arm. Right? I didn't understand what it meant. I didn't understand his importance into the story. And I just remember such iconic locations like Cosmo Canyon. The first time you step foot in the Cosmo Canyon, you're like, wow. Mm-hmm. Coming from Midgar, this place of steampunk kind of industrialization, and then you end up in Cosmo Canyon, you end up in Rocket Town. Hell, even Wutai with the pagodas and everything is just it's just, I remember so many snippets as a watcher, but then you get your hands on the game for the first time, and as a player, it just seems so. You just start to learn the importance of the locations. You start to learn about the characters, and it really just kind of hits that encapsulation on a new level, So I'm curious as to when you picked up the game, you didn't have the opportunity to watch it kind of first. You kind of picked it up in your hands, and you were running with it.
So I have a really weird starting point for 7, and this may completely disqualify me as a 7 fan, depending on how rabid our fan base is. But before I ever played Final Fantasy VII, or before I ever played any Final Fantasy game at all, I played Kingdom Hearts 1 and 2. So, you get to Olympus Coliseum. Spoilers for Kingdom Hearts 1, by the way, guys. 2002. You get to Olympus Coliseum, and it's Hades is I got the perfect guy to beat this Sora kid. Ha ha ha. And out walks Cloud. And it's not even regular Cloud. It's Cloud with Vincent's scarf and cape, and Vincent's big golden claw, and the Buster Sword is wrapped up in bandages and stuff.
I remember seeing this, and I was caught off guard by his appearance.
And this is Cloud, and he's swooshing his hair back. He's like leaning against the wall and like scowling and stuff. And he's just like, I'm just being paid for this, whatever. The darkness inside me. And, I'm like looking at this, but I'm like 13. I'm just like, bro, this guy's so cool.
Yeah.
And then, Cloud, he does the thing and he's gone and it's whatever. But like you go to Traverse Town and like Aerith and Yuffie are there, Cid is there. And then the secret boss is Sephiroth.
Yep.
And then in Kingdom Hearts 2, Tifa shows up. And there's like all these characters that I'm just like, something is going on here. This is an inside
Who are these
joke.
people? Yeah.
And then my brother, who is like just an even bigger video game nerd than I am, like he came back with Final Fantasy 1, the gray cartridge for the NES.
Oh,
And
yeah.
this is in like 2008 or something.
Mm-hmm.
So the first Final Fantasy I ever touched was Final Fantasy 1 on the NES. And then we got the ones that came out on the Game Boy, like 1, 2, 4, 5, 6. I played 10. I played 12. And I was just like circling 7 for all these years. And it was so interesting because it was this game that was like on a system that I didn't really have access to. And like it had this legendary cult status. It was like if you didn't have a Nintendo, hearing about Ocarina of Time.
Oh,
it's
yeah,
like,
yeah.
For a decade, it was just like this landmark video game that people consider like this legendary, the apex of JRPGs, like the culmination of the entire series, best anything that came before or since. And it was after we started hanging out, at our mutual friend's attic, and we would sit around Friday to Saturday, just nonstop video game binges.
Yeah.
And one day, you brought the PS1 over, and we're like, we're going to play 7. And I'm like, I'm holding this in my hands. And keep in mind, we're fucking old now. So, like,
Yeah, right.
back then, like, emulation was, like, not as readily available. There was no digital store on the PS3 or anything like that.
Yeah, right. We maybe could have figured it out, but at that point, it was kind of in its infancy.
I didn't have a laptop till I went to college,
Yeah.
and my parents' computer basically ran on coal. So, like, it's like seeing this game in front of me for the first time was like, geez, oh my god, it's like holding a Bible.
No, it's so true. I mean, there's just such. I mean, I guess my experience with Final Fantasy, I didn't kind of delve into that internet side of it. I know there was this conversational gravitas around Final Fantasy 7, but I kind of cherish my experience with Final Fantasy 7 just because it was so isolated from everything else. Like, I remember watching my brother play, and we had the guidebook, that showed you where all like the missables, showed you where all the materia was and everything, and it was. It was just kind of an intoxicating experience to delve into that world solo, really.
I think that's something that's like irreplaceable now because you can't escape Final Fantasy VII. Like its reputation and legacy precede it. So like if you've never played it, you've probably heard of it.
Yeah.
And like there's no way, like if you are a person who was just trolling the PlayStation Store one day and you were like, Final Fantasy VII. Never heard of that. Never played any others. Don't try. Like if you managed to get into 7 cold somehow after 7 released, like I think that's incredible, and that's an experience that is increasingly difficult to replicate, especially now on the internet and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Because like you got to play 7 without context, and I got to play 7 with a gargantuan amount of context.
Yeah, true. That's true.
I had seen clips from Advent Children before I ever got my hands on a controller.
Jeez.
Yeah,
oh
right?
my God.
So, that'll be something that we definitely discuss later, but it's like I had a lot of preconceived notions about these characters, and then I'm playing the OG, and I'm like, Cloud's sort of a dork.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of context that's kind of put on these characters through everyone's interpretation, right? Which is why I think Cloud's, his demeanor is so iconic in the sense that, like, yeah, he's kind of like an emo jerk in the beginning of the story, but as you go through that story kind of with him, you develop the understanding of why he's like this. He doesn't truly understand his past. He doesn't know why he feels the way he is, but he's just like, he's just this emo guy who's just trying to really make it through life when you meet him in Sector 7, rather.
Yeah. No, when you play the original, like immediately from the bombing mission, like you could tell he's just like he's callous, he's like distant, he's like trying to be away, but he doesn't have that like really edgy, like he doesn't lean against walls and flip his hair in the game. Like you can tell he's awkward and he's trying to stay tight in these conversations with these people he doesn't know. Unprofessional. I'm gonna put mine in airplane mode while I talk. But no, I think like as you go and you see him open up to these people, like you can tell how obvious it is and how intentional that's a facade for Cloud.
Yeah.
And like that's a really important part of the original game. Like, you know, going through and seeing Cloud open up and not just like go from like big mean jerk guy to soft friendly guy, but also seeing him open up to like these fears and insecurities and like, you know, the parts of himself that he buried, trauma and like failures. Like that's critical to Cloud.
Yeah, I mean that's the whole Medial section, right? Of like delving into the life stream, or they fall into the life stream, and then Tifa goes after him, and it's just like figuring out his past. Yeah, that's why that's such an iconic scene, really. And
it makes Aerith's relationship with Cloud so much more interesting in hindsight, because like while he is just like constantly trying to, or you know, intentionally or unintentionally burying this Zack part of his mind, it's dawning on Aerith in real time. Like, this isn't just a weird coincidence. Like, clearly there's something going on here.
Yeah.
But, you know, once you move out of 7 original and you, like, you know, Kingdom Hearts, Advent Children, like, all this stuff, like, it really seems like those games took this early snapshot of Cloud and not a late snapshot of Cloud. And that's just what his interpretation in other media became. It was this hard, edgy dude. Where that's not the heart or the best parts of Cloud's character. So for me, coming into this being like, you know, I had 10 years to have it beaten into my brain that Cloud is like big sword anime protagonist.
Yeah.
Like, you know, edgy, dark, late 90s, early 2000s edge. And then I was like, this is actually a pretty complex character that is really belied by the, you know, Mr. Potato Head graphics of the PS1 version.
Yeah, I mean, but I guess kind of... It's totally understandable, and as a first experience, that totally makes sense that was kind of your interpretation of Cloud, just because that is how he's portrayed in other games. Mm-hmm. But I'm curious how you would have felt if he was portrayed as like Disc 3 Cloud, where he's like, you know, he's figured himself out, he understands that, you know, he wasn't that, like, that wouldn't be the same. You would just have this fulfilled kind of joyous character. Not joyous, I guess, but I don't even know how to describe him. He's just like more of a team.
Yeah, he's
confident, calm. He's more of a team player. You know, he's just... That wouldn't be the same Cloud. That wouldn't be a good interpretation of him.
No, it wouldn't, because like any good character arc, like it's only as good as the journey that you go with the character. Seeing them at
That's
the
what
end
I was going to say, yeah.
That's what I was going to say. Like, you know, Cloud, well-adjusted Cloud being hired by Hades would not have been interesting. But, you know, like you play, and obviously, like this is probably sacrificing for the medium itself, but like Sephiroth is a voiced and like story-present character in Kingdom Hearts 2.
Yeah.
And like, you know, they're all in their Advent Children things. And like, as Cloud and Sephiroth interact, it's like, I knew that they were, like, enemies. Like, I knew he was the bad guy in 7 and Cloud is the hero. Because they have, like, a brief cutscene in Kingdom Hearts 1, too. But all the dialogue is like, I will never be a memory, Cloud. I am your darkness. And, like, you know, they vanish while they're fighting, and Tifa is like, Cloud has gone to find the light or something. And I'm like, this game sounds fucking dumb. Then again, I am 50 hours into Kingdom Hearts 2, so I can't really judge.
Looks at Donald and Goofy. Oh,
yeah, I'm like, you seeing this shit? Gorsh.
Gorsh.
But no, like, you know, it's like I understand that is like your vertical slice Cloud.
Yeah.
Like, you know, like gruff on the outside, kind of edgy, but like there's depths beneath that.
So let me ask you then, if that was kind of your first kind of introduction to Cloud, is meeting him through Kingdom Hearts, then once we played it in the iconic attic, where, I mean, what did you think, you know?
So I'll admit, like, especially when you're dealing with the original and it's text boxes and stuff like that, like, that was an interesting venue to do it because there were like 6 of us who were sitting around playing this game, you know, eating junk food and stuff.
Yeah.
And you know, like you're going through it and like you're laughing at this ridiculous translation. Like this is original disc.
The polygons.
Completely unedited dialogue. Like that original translation is rough.
Yeah.
This guy are sick.
This guy are sick.
Couldn't find it in remake. If it's there, someone email me.
Yeah.
But, you know, like at the time I was like, well, this isn't what I was expecting. It's not bad, but it's like, this is weird. It really wasn't until I sat down and played it myself and got to like really like be patient with it and like kind of marinate in it that I started being like, this is a more interesting version of Cloud. Yeah. And I will also confess that, you know, fans of the podcast, hopefully, if you haven't heard of this, you're in for a treat. I listen to Tim Rogers' Les Mosey once a year, every year. And it's basically like 10 hours of YouTube video just talking and slowly going through the nuances of characterization that's lost between English and Japanese. So I've had it like beaten into my brain.
Yeah.
Like.
Yeah, and you've also had a lot of different interpretation, different voices kind of tossing into your into what you build of the characters.
So my interpretation of Cloud is not just my own. Like I can't remove the context of my experience with 7 because like I've had a solo playthroughs, but I've had playthroughs with friends, I've played remake, I've watched videos, like, you know, there's a lot to it.
Yeah.
But I'll flip this script, though, and be like, so for me, I had all this context before I played the original game. Assuming you've played, you know, Kingdom Hearts and you've been exposed to Advent Children, for you, who had this, like, totally isolated, like, neutral experience with 7 and having been able to see Cloud from start to finish, what was it like then seeing him flipped into all this other media?
I mean, it's not that's a good question. It's not I never thought it a one-dimensional interpretation of Cloud. I kind of always, because as you go through the story, you get Cloud in the beginning, you know, you understand where he is, and then you go through all, you know, disc 2, disc 3, you go through Deal, Cloud finds himself, you kind of build that experience with Cloud, and if with no other context coming from the outside, I delved into that story, really. I kind of got encapsulated by it. So I understood where he was throughout the process. So when I see something like Kingdom Hearts, and, you know, he, like you said, he's leaned up against the wall, arms crossed, flipping the hair. It's like, I understand where that interpretation comes from. I don't see that as a full embodiment of the character. Yeah. I see that as kind of a snapshot coming from the outside, because that is a facet of his personality, this kind of cocky, confident, like, individual. Granted, it's not until the end, but I do believe there is that facet of his personality. Mm-hmm. And I guess I've always kind of been able to just accept that is kind of who Cloud can be described as. Yeah. Because it's not I don't see it as a incorrect interpretation. I just see it as a slice of his personality, a single facet rather than the full thing.
I suppose now that we're like actually taking our time with it, like if you consider that is how he acted towards Avalanche when he meets them, you know, for the bombing run.
Yeah.
Like that is the face, the mask that Cloud wears for strangers that he's trying to keep a distance at, people that he might have to abandon, people that he's just working for or with. And like if you look at Kingdom Hearts 1, like that's what he's doing. Like, he was hired by Hades to fight Sora and Donald and Goofy. And, you know, Kingdom Hearts is wild.
Yeah, but, I mean, I guess I kind of imagine, like, what if... Because you can't introduce, like, endgame Cloud, right? Yeah. You couldn't have him be like, oh, like, I remember... like, go through Kingdom Hearts 1 and Cloud's just like, Aerith and the Holy Materia. Let me explain the entire plot line. Like, it makes sense that they would choose kind of the version of him that is... pre-pubescent. I mean, not pubescent, obviously, but like
the immature version.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The beginning version of Cloud.
I could like Cloud, something that like, you know, I'll fess up now here in episode 1. Like I'm not an Advent Children fan. Like I'm not into it. I think that contributed a lot to this perception of Cloud as just like this edgy big sword boy.
Okay.
But like, I think older Cloud as like a mentor figure, as someone who's gone through hell and came out on top and has seen loss, like a wiser adult Cloud is interesting. I think that's cool. It makes sense to me why Kingdom Hearts of all series didn't do the legwork to make that Cloud, even though it is Tetsuya Nomura.
Yep.
And B, like, for your first introduction to the character, it would make no sense. Like,
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Agreed 100%.
In Kingdom Hearts 3, if they brought Cloud back, and like they did that, then it would have been interesting.
Yeah.
But they ditched all Final Fantasy characters for 3. It was very sad.
Interesting.
Yeah. Fun fact.
One of the many reasons everyone hates 3.
Not everyone hates 3. I hate 3, though. Send me your hate mail. It fuels me. But fun fact, though. Birth by Sleep, if you weren't aware, your party member when you go to Olympus Coliseum is a teenage Zack.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
He's doing the squats and stuff. He's wearing like Hercules armor and like a Spartan helmet and
That's
stuff.
kind of awesome.
It was cool. Awesome. Yeah, I'd like the first time I saw that, I was like, whoa.
Yeah, I mean, I guess as far as the first experience goes, man, it really kind of. I guess I didn't realize the differences we had as far as like how we experienced it. It totally makes sense. Mm-hmm. Totally makes sense. But I mean, I can't stress how enjoyable that game is if you don't have this outside context. Granted, I don't think that's possible with this day and age, but there's just something so enjoyable about it's not even Final Fantasy VII specifically. Any JRPG is just like going through it yourself, figuring it all out there's something just so rewarding, really satisfying, you know?
It's true. And I mean, like, and this is really, it feels like stating the obvious, but it's like, it's kind of like a binary. Like, with any sort of experience, like a movie or a video game or a book, you're either going into it with context or without it.
Yeah.
And, like, there's a firm line there. Like, you know, you can have, like, a little bit. It's like, you can know, spoilers, Aerith dies going into it. And, like, that's a pretty big, like, you know, split.
Yeah.
Or, on the other hand, it's like, you know Crisis Core exists. You've seen Zack, but you don't understand what Zack means to the story, so you're just sitting there being like, I wonder when that guy's going to show up.
Yeah, and I mean, if Remake is your first introduction to Final Fantasy VII, I think the developers say all the time that you don't, they're trying to make these games stand alone, but it's like, I just don't see how that's possible without the context of OG, right? Yeah. It doesn't make sense how you would really kind of delve into the story. Like, yes, it'll stand alone as its own story, but, like, you truly don't have the full context unless you've played the OG.
Yeah, I agree. And, like, it's not even, like, accidental. Like,
no, it's not. It's built in very purposefully.
Yeah, it's very much intentional. And it's not just like a tongue-in-cheek wink, wink, haha, ooh, see what we're doing here kind of thing. Like, no, the time ghosts are there.
Yeah.
And, like, they are explicitly pointing out these moments in the story that, like, you know, they only show up at these really high critical story beats. Yeah. And, you know, having just replayed Remake, like, the first time when they're really, like, in your face is when Barrett basically fires Cloud, and he's just like, we don't need you for this next one, it's gonna be fine. And Cloud's just like, whatever, see ya. And then
pay me my money.
Yeah, the timeline is just like, hell no. So they cripple Jesse to get shit back on track.
Yep.
And you know, it's just like the first time around, maybe it's just, you know, you don't catch it, but now you looking back at it with that context, and you know, also having played original fairly recently, it's just like, oh yeah, if this didn't happen this way, clearly, like, things would have derailed.
Things would have gone a different direction. Yeah, 100%. And I guess that's kind of what what makes Zack's appearance so interesting, right? Like, how is that really going to play into the whole situation?
I shit my own ass the first time Zack showed up at the end of 7. That was wild.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that's kind of what the story will be hinging on, as far as, like, if they're able to implement Zack in a organic way, as long as they don't just shoehorn him into the story, I think that will be a point of contention and or a breaking point for the narrative.
I think that like, this is a good segue into another, like, critical piece of talking about Final Fantasy VII, which is, you know, like, nostalgia. Like, you know, I played it for the first time in, like, 2008. Which is 10 years later than people who played it for the first time. And now we're in 2023. Like, there's a lot of time and distance there. And, like, let's not split hairs here. 7 is a game that a lot of people put on a pedestal. Like,
you know, that's fair.
A lot of people will, you know, like, rose-colored glasses or not, like it's held up as like the best JRPG up until that point. People will still argue it's the best Final Fantasy, period. Yeah. And like when Remake came out, like there was instant visceral reactions to changes, like, you know, the battle system, to say nothing of the story and all that type of thing. And like I'm of the perspective, and I believe you are too, that like I like Remake. I do. Like I don't think it replaces the original by any means. But like I think that it is a logical progression of how you could reintroduce the original story while doing something new and fresh.
Agreed.
Yeah. Agreed. Not that I wouldn't have accepted a one-for-one remake just with these killer graphics, but you know, like I think that it has its place and it's useful. However, like there is a point where you have to tread carefully, because like you said, if they do completely derail it and like if they just go in some completely different direction, at best, people will feel like they were tricked into buying something that, you know, they were expecting one thing and it's something completely different. I saw that criticism a lot for the original, or for Remake, rather.
Yeah, I think the Time Ghosts, I mean, the Whispers of Fate are kind of the crux of that whole argument as well.
Yeah. I am true neutral on the Time Ghosts.
Yeah.
Like, I don't love them, but, like, they don't ruin it for me.
Yeah, so, no, agreed.
But, like, there are things that you can do that would ruin the story. Like, there are story beats that you can't afford to miss, and I'm not saying that it has to wind up in exactly the same ending. Like, it doesn't have to be precisely what happens, but depending on how early you split this, like, I feel like at that point you're kind of mistreating the property that you're working with. And Zach's presence is the one thing where I'm like, you're making me nervous.
Yes, I mean, 100%. We've had this conversation. I mean, again, first experiences with Final Fantasy VII. I'm sure you knew that, you know, I'm sure you knew about the iconic scene, right? You know, that spoilers, you know. I'm sure you knew about the iconic scene in that game, but, like, experiencing it from my end, I was like, dude, like, I have one healer, and it's Aerith. Like, and now I don't. What do I do? Who do I use to heal? Barrett? Like,
I never got great gospel. God damn.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just like it was such a jarring experience, whereas Zack as well as that scene, I think, are kind of, in my mind, where they could go wrong. Because I don't see how they're going to implement that scene with any other sort of outcome, really. I think that would do the original story disjustice, and it would just seem like a retcon for the sake of changing the narrative. It wouldn't feel authentic for the story.
There are games that I can think of where, like, you play the game and it goes a certain way, and then when you beat it and you have a chance to do New Game Plus, you can make different choices, or maybe if you're carrying over your stats, you can win boss fights that you weren't supposed to win, and, you know, make those changes. There are games with multiple endings, and there's a best ending, you know, and everybody lives ending. These remakes are not set up so far to do something like that. They're very much it is a story that they want to tell, and they're doing it a one and done, and, like, that's cool. Like, I'm into that.
Yeah.
I think because the remakes are meant to be one connected story without multiple endings so far, it would be really shitty to completely undo that scene.
Agreed.
Like, if this is going to be an authentic 7 experience, even if it's a rehash, like, there are certain pillar moments that, like, you need to have for it to be 7 that are critical to its identity. And as much as people like me, who are big Aerith fans, like, as much as it's gonna hurt, you can't not have that.
Yeah.
But, like, what if they flip it? What if Tifa dies instead? Like,
no way, dude. No way. I wouldn't accept that, dude.
Well, that'll be
immediately return the game.
That's a podcast episode in and of itself. I would just be like, all right, let's see where we're going with this.
Yeah, I think Zack is the other kind of piece to that puzzle. Like he's the other kind of iconic part in the story, in that he's not part of the story, really. So, like, his introduction into how this goes, like, what if instead of Aerith dying, Zack shows up and saves her?
I'll be so fucking
Zack is the one that dies. Yeah, that would feel... That would feel like a jip.
That makes me want to rip my skin off just thinking about it.
It would feel, it wouldn't feel good, honestly. It wouldn't feel good.
I'd be sad. Like, no Deus Ex Machina. Or if you save Aerith, like, fucking reality starts to unravel immediately or something.
Right. Yeah, and then, I guess, like, there's a million possibilities that could happen. What if Aerith is saved, and then it turns out she needed to die, so she dies in another way?
Or it seems implied, like, there's this scene in Remake that's variable, depending on how many, or, like, how friendly you are to your party members, where the person that you go outside with, the night you stay at Aerith's mom's house. I got Aerith this time because she's the best girl, and I will provide. Yes.
Barrett for life.
All right. Respect. Yeah. But Aerith has this speech. She's just like, Cloud, I'm so glad I got to know you. Like, you're such a. Even though we haven't had a lot of time together, like, it's precious to me. But you cannot, no matter what, fall in love with me. Yeah. And, like, Cloud, like, is immediately taken aback and drops all of his spaghetti, but he's like, no.
I've never felt love.
Do I have a say in this? But, like, that's clearly Aerith being like, uh-oh. If I remember correctly, this will record audio, but not visual.
Yeah. Ugh.
Oh, that's fine. Gives me a moment to stretch my neck. And can practice your splicing skills.
Yeah. Now I'm just going to figure out the password. No.
Dim sum. Alright, cool. Alright, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah, the moment with Aerith at her place. Saying, like, you can't fall in love with me is, like, clearly, A, she knows what's supposed to happen.
Yep.
And B, it definitely seems like she's committed to that. Like, she's not trying to fight that fate. I don't know, like, Aerith's place in Remake is weird, and we're going to definitely get more when Rebirth comes out. But it's like, clearly she is trying to divert the timeline a little bit, but it doesn't seem to me like it's to save her own skin. I think it's because she knows Sephiroth isn't beaten for real, because he's clearly back and doing shit in this. And I don't know if that's like an Advent Children thing, if she's trying to stop Geostigma or whatever the hell. But like...
Yeah, I mean, exactly. Who knows who knows her motivations.
Yeah. So, like, that's what has me on the hook. As much as, like, looking at Junon and Calm and, the thought of getting the escape buggy and the golden saucer, like, all is...
Riding segways!
It's going to be so fucking sick. I cannot wait to drive the broke-ass tiny Bronco as a boat, in the water. We're going to see Palmer get hit by a truck. It's going to be so great.
I'm very curious if that'll be a scene. But that's a story for a different day.
Yeah, that'll be its own thing. Yeah. But, like, as much as all of that, like, the 7 stuff, just that I'd be happy to see again, like, I'm hooked because I'm just like, all right, Aerith, like, what's going on here?
Yeah, 100%.
What's going on with Zack?
100%.
What do I have to do to keep you alive in this version? I don't care about everything I just said. If they give me the opportunity to save Aerith, I'm taking it.
Yeah, no, I mean, everyone would, right? I think every single person would. Unless it requires sacrificing Tifa, in which case they're just building that divide more and more, right?
Sorry, Tifa. In the ground.
But yeah, I mean, just going back to the first experiences, really, like, you as an outsider, you learned... I guess you didn't really learn about their importance towards the story as much as you learned about the characters first. So what was your take of like your first impressions of going through the character stories? Like, yes, there's Cloud and there's his evolution, but even like Barrett, like there's the Barrett that you meet in the beginning who's like, yeah, let's save the Earth. Like the Shinra's destroying everything. Mako's evil. Like Mako's the lifeblood of the world, but it's like we're sucking it out of the earth, and you can tell by all the area surrounding Midgar, right? Which is just completely drained of life. So and then you get to dying,
Yeah.
And like, how does like Barrett's story? That's kind of, in my opinion, where Barrett's story really ends.
Barrett's, well, I might be getting do you hit Cosmo Canyon before or after Dine?
Let's see. You meet Dine in the Coral Prison.
Mm-hmm.
Ah, jeez, that's a good question.
I honestly,
that's a good question.
It's been a minute, because Barrett's capstone moment for me is around the fire at Cosmo Canyon, where like Barrett, like, you know, you talk to Bugenhagen and he's talking about like all the shit and Meteor and all that, and he's just like, well, shit. Barrett has this moment where he's like, Biggs and Wedge and Jesse, like they all went back to the planet and they died fighting for it and all that. But it's like, I have to be honest, I never really cared about the planet. I just hated Shinra, and this was just an excuse for me to get back at the Shinras.
Yeah.
And like that is such a tremendous moment for Barrett, and like especially when you see how they've like really juiced him up for Remake, where he's just this like really evangelical, like charisma magnet who's out there like standing up on soapboxes and will talk to anyone who will listen just about like, you're bleeding the planet dry, blah 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 blah.
Yeah.
And like, I didn't know Barrett existed. Because Barrett is a complicated character for a lot of reasons that they don't put in things like Kingdom Hearts.
Yeah, that's fair.
So, you know, like he didn't have the staying power that Tifa and Aerith and like weirdly Sid for Kingdom Hearts.
Intro, and that's not, that might be personal to you.
Yeah, like that was a choice, but like Red and like Kate Sith and Barrett don't really get as much attention. So like Barrett is this character that I got completely fresh, and you start off being like, bro, what are these text boxes?
Yeah, right. Stop swearing at me.
What is this? Like, clearly he's based off Mr. T, and I'm like, this is kind of sick. Like, I don't know how to take this character seriously. But Barrett is an example of something that I think Remake is going to very much remedy, or at least they're doing well so far, where like Barrett has those moments with Dime and at Cosmo Canyon, and then he's just sort of like there. Like, he doesn't really do anything. He gives Cloud shit at different points in time.
Yep.
He's like, save your spiky ass.
Yeah.
That sort of thing. But he really falls off. So like, I appreciated Barrett. I liked Barrett, but like he was just like the guy who became my mage in my party pretty much.
Yeah, that's fair. That's kind of what he turns into, right? He's the long range plus mage.
Yeah. So like, you know, I didn't really have a great deal of emotional investment in a lot of those characters, because like after Cosmo Canyon, Red 13 doesn't really do anything.
Yeah, and even like the first impression of all the characters, like what is Tifa's, like her story is for lack of a better term to be, you know, the crush for Cloud.
Yeah.
To help Cloud. That's her story, is to be part of Cloud's story.
Yeah.
And even like Aerith has debatably one of the largest role in the story, right? Yeah. But even like Red 13, like you're saying, his story ends at Cosmo Canyon. Barrett's really ends at Dine, and the rest of it is just kind of pushing Cloud's story further. You get Yuffie's side, which is completely optional. You don't even need to find out about her.
Yuffie's not, like, she doesn't interact with the characters because she's optional. Same thing with Vincent. And I mean, like, they're both cool. Kate Sith does nothing, and then there's the Gold Saucer, and then he goes back to doing nothing. And like Sid is also, he's like your late game party member who shows up. He's really fun. He has like a cool perspective. He's amusing. But like, you know, he has his moment in the sun, and then
he wants to be a spaceman.
Yeah. So like there's these moments in Remake where like you can tell that they're like intentionally trying to steer away from that. Like that boss fight against the Valkyrie when you're climbing up to the Sector 7 plate. And like, you know, Barrett falls and he like shoots his grappling gun and he misses, and it's like the Cloud swings down and he's like, Tifa, and Tifa like grabs his arm, and like with her other arm she shoots it, and she's like, Barrett, and Barrett grabs it, and they like swing up, and then they dust themselves off, and it's just like, this is the well-oiled machine avalanche.
Yeah.
And like, especially because like I think most people have played more Midgar than the rest of the game, because like you play it and like,
that's true,
it's safe to get out of Midgar and then you might fall off as you go. So Midgar is full of these really iconic moments, and just I can't overstate how fulfilling it is for me whenever they line up Cloud, Tifa, and Barrett like in a scene.
Really?
Just like looking at it, because like I'm so used to that exact lineup with the little potato graphics.
Yeah.
And it's just like, I have such affection for these characters that is just mostly nostalgia because it's not really delivered on in the OG story.
It's true. It's so true. Yeah. So much of the emotion towards the characters is put on by yourself because, like, realistically, I mean, there's just not much of a story for some of these characters. Not much to, like, sink your teeth into, but you kind of make it up anyways, you know?
And I think that's very typical of a lot of games at that time because it's like, this thing was on 3 goddamn discs. Like, it's not as if it's wanting for content, but, like, you know, it's just like you had to work with what you had. So you had to prioritize certain things over others. So.
Yeah, and I mean, that's a great That's a great kind of segue into, like, your first experiences, like, with Midgar. You're going through the story, you know, you get to Wall Market, you kind of go through this whole thing, get to the Honeybee Inn, and then, like, after you've spent these hours running through Midgar and, like, dealing with the emotional trauma of having a city fall on top of another city. Then you get outside of Midgar, and I remember my first playthrough because I never finished it. Is like I watched my brother play through it, and, like, I wasn't there every second of his playthrough. So I didn't know there were these kind of shining moments of these locations, you know, the Lost City, you know, the Temple of the Ancients, the Cosmo Canyon, as I said, Rocket Town. Like, there's these snapshots, but there's nothing like that first playthrough where you get outside of Midgar and, like, it's like if you don't know where you're going, it is like it's a process to get to Calm. It's like you don't just, like, walk outside Midgar and 2 steps later you're in Calm. It's
You've never been in an overworld map before, and you're just like, what do I do?
You're running around. There's like technically there's only one location you can get to, which is Calm, but it's a ways away. You know, you're gonna get into, like, a couple fights before then. You're just kind of figuring out the overworld. You look at the map, you see how big it is. Like, there's just a lot.
That had this weird feeling that I don't think a lot of games have really emulated, where it's like you feel like you've gone outside, like you've been indoors for 8 hours, and then you step out and it's just like, what? I'm confused. Like, the world is so much bigger than what I thought.
It's so true. It's so true. And you've spent so much time in that setting of Midgar, which, I mean, is an entire another episode of like how they build Midgar out. And then you get to these other locations, you know, like Calm, Mithril Mines is just, like, totally different. You kind of get your introduction to Shinra. I mean, not
you're doing the cloud flashback through Mount Ebel and stuff.
Yeah, like I mean, Fort Condor, right? There's there's so many weird places that you go to, and kind of the story brings you, and it's encapsulating, because I remember, like, as a kid just being so excited to go play it, you know, just being so excited, being like, wow, I'm outside of Midgar. I just heard all of Cloud's story, and then you end up at a chocobo farm. You're just like, what the fuck? What the hell's going on?
No, it's like, it's really interesting, because, like, you know, I've seen people criticize, like, you know, why do they have to do it in 3 parts? Why couldn't they just do the whole remake all at once, blah, blah, blah. Like, I'm at, like, hour 32 right outside of President Shinra's office. Yeah. And it's like, I don't feel cramped. I don't feel like the game has at all lacked for being set only in Midgar so far.
Agreed, yeah.
And, like, even when you're playing the original, it's like, you're looking at those 2 other discs being like, what the fuck was going to be on? And, like, I think there's a logical assumption, maybe, if you don't know what else is coming next. It's like, you really only go into sectors 7, 5, and 6.
Yeah.
So it's like, oh, yeah, you know, maybe I'll be going around Midgar. And then it's like, no, you're banished from Midgar. Like, the whole world is out there, but I never felt like it was incomplete. And that's just such good world building. Yeah. Where, like, Midgar is so dense, but there's so much more, too.
Oh, agreed 100%. And I've heard the complaint about the remake where everyone's like, you know, they give examples of, like, various other games. I think Assassin's Creed is one of the big ones where they're just like, there are these sprawling cities that I can explore in all of these games. But I think you're totally missing the point of Final Fantasy VII when you're thinking like that. Mm-hmm. It's not about having this massive city to explore and 30 million side quests. Yeah. Final Fantasy VII really is about the story, you know? It's like, it's kind of what taught me about, like, environmentalism at all. Like, Barrett going through, like, having Barrett swear at me in the first couple hours of the game, just being like, dude, the Earth is dying. We're trying to fucking save it, you know? Yeah. Like, that's what they're trying to do.
No. There's this great moment when you're up in Shinra Tower, in Remake, and like Tifa calls you and Barrett over, and she's just like, look at that. And you're like looking out the window from like the 47th floor, and you can see Midgar all around you. And Barrett has this moment, like, again, he's just like, in this version, he's just so articulate and like ready to just drop these environmental bombs at any time.
Yeah.
Where he's like, yeah, it's beautiful, but like every light down there, every stove and every lamp, every street light, everything you see is a drop of blood from Mother Earth that's used for these frivolous things. And it's beautiful and disgusting all at once. Yeah. And it's just like, damn, Barrett. Like, that's sick. Obviously, I'm a millennial, so I've, grown up in that context my entire life.
Yeah.
But, like, I think that that's a really good, like, on the nose, like, shaking you and being like, this is the theme of this story.
It really doesn't, at least, I mean, I haven't experienced too many games that really kind of drive a point home like that, where it's like, you're going through the story of Cloud and everything, but it really is this large backdrop of just like, dude, like environmentalism, like we're killing our Earth, and it's like you really see the parallels. You don't even see it until you're thinking about it, but you really do see the parallels with the real world. You're just like, wow, okay, like, we are killing our Earth, for lack of a better term.
I think that's another good thing that kind of lays into this topic of original experience too, because it's like, now it's 2023. Like, climate change is not just super real. It's like that should be obvious to everybody. Like, we're already starting to run up into the edges of those consequences. And it's the type of thing where it's like you hear or read about it all the time. And that's just been here forever. But back in 1997, 1998, it's not as if it wasn't known or on people's minds, but like it clearly was not as part of this mainstream dialogue. The way that it is now.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely part of, like, communication, right? Like, back in, 1999, like, we didn't have all Reddit. We didn't have all these subreddits talking about literally everything all the time, always, So it's just, like, understandable. I mean, we did know about it, but wasn't the level of dissemination for information, right?
I don't, I was 6 in 1997.
Yeah.
So, I don't know if that was big parts of political platforms back then. I don't know what sort of presidential promises were being made. I know that later in our lives, Bush and Obama and, later on, like, that was an integral part of any sort of policy. Like, what side are you on? That's an entirely different subject that this podcast is not going to cover. But, like back in 1997, like this is like to put it in your face and to have a character who is like all about this and not like some touchy-feely druid tree hugger kind of person. To have Barrett be this radical and like... Yeah,
this rough kind of rigid personality. He was just like, dude, fucking save the Earth. Like,
he's not someone who like came out of the forest to like tell you that the animals are sad.
Yeah.
Like, he's here to tell you, like, he's a miner who now owns a bar down in the slums, and he has a gun for a hand. And he's going to bomb your power plants because, they're wasteful and they're draining the planet of its life.
And I mean, it all, like, kind of going back to the first experience, and when you get to the Coral Prison, you learn about his backstory, how, like, he was kind of, I guess, for lack of a better term, kind of lied to by Shinra, saying that, like, this reactor is going to make their entire lives better, and it ends up just like destroying his town.
Yeah,
like that's kind of it lays into the backstory, and it definitely kind of backs up that scene in Cosmo Canyon of him being like, listen guys, I actually just fucking hate Shinra because like, and then you learn why, because like they destroyed his town growing up.
I actually didn't put that together until you just said it, but the other day, like, I'm climbing up Shinra Tower in Remake, and you get to this like the big model Midgar where they're like talking about like, it's the city of Mako, blah blah blah. It's like going through the Disney World ride.
Yeah.
And Barrett he's just dripping hostility at every moment, like just disdain for everything Shinra. And, he has some quip afterwards where he's just like, oh, yeah, no, Shinra's just shit and Mako is poison and, like, they're ruining the world. And Cloud, who has always been kind of like a fence sitter through this story. Like, he's the first one to point out that the Shinra guards are just doing their jobs and, like, they are totally innocent people. He has this moment where he, like, kind of, like, claps back at Barrett where he's like, except Mako does make people's lives better.
Yeah.
And in Midgar, that's mostly true. but like Barrett just like angrily scoffs and turns away. But it's like, for Cloud, it makes sense. You're looking at all this stuff and people who have these modern conveniences. And, you know, they're literally decades before. It's just like doing your best to fight off these giant monsters.
Yeah, right.
That are just going to eat you. It's nice living in a big walled city, isn't it? But, like, Barrett was told that exact same thing before, and it was on the worst day of his life.
Yeah.
So, like, having that unspoken, like, moment where, like, if you've gone through this before, you know. Like, I didn't put it together at the time, but now it's like that small throwaway line is like, nice.
Right.
Nice.
But again, it's a throwback to the original where you just don't have the same story unless you played the original. Mm-hmm. You just don't, you know.
It's true. And like, you know, if you had that moment, it's just like, okay, cool. It's like Cloud and Barrett. You know, Cloud's a little more moderate. Barrett's always angry. Blah blah blah. And like, it won't be until you play Remake Part 2 when you get this Dine flashback where you're just like, oh man, Barrett was legit the whole time.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I mean, it sheds light on who Marlene is. Because I can't imagine what someone's thinking about Marlene. Yeah. It's like, why is this Barrett's daughter? Is this Tifa's daughter? Like, who is this person? Yeah. You know?
No, and it never comes up. She never asks for her mom or anything like that. She doesn't call him Barrett. She calls him Daddy.
Yeah.
Like, you know.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'll be interested how they implement Dine, because like one of the big things about the whole remake is they're saying like you're going to visit these locations in different orders than you would normally do. So it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting.
Part 2 is really where you kind of get everybody, because you get Nibelheim for Cloud and Tifa. You're getting, you know, Coral for Barrett. You're getting Cosmo Canyon. You're getting Rocket Town. Like, this is where everyone's getting their... Well, hopefully. If they're going to get to the Temple of the Ancients, they have to do Rocket Town.
Yep.
So, like... But, like, this is where everybody gets their characterization. And in Remake Part 1, it doesn't really feel like people were under-characterized. But if you look back at the Midgar segment of Original, like... Everyone's kind of like an archetype. Like, Tifa is there, and Tifa's cool, but she's kind of like, I am girl.
Yeah.
I like Cloud.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's fair. That's totally fair.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the whole points of the remake is just, like, kind of flesh out their stories a little more.
Yeah.
Rather than just have Tifa be Cloud's cheerleader, rather than have Aerith just be, well... Who knows how they're going to change Aerith's story. But yeah, I mean, there's a thousand things to say about that, and that's a different episode.
No, I think, at least I would say like this. I think this is a good way to like look at bridging our experience with original and remake. Is like, there's so much about the original that I hold dear, and like I try not to like, you know, be too precious about certain things. Like, you know, time changes. There is nostalgia and rose-colored glasses at play. It's whatever. So like, if going into remake, like I was just so stoked. Like all of it was just amazing. Like we wouldn't be doing this podcast if we didn't like the direction that 7 was going in.
100%, yeah, 100%.
And I'm super excited for Rebirth, with the knowledge that like nothing will ever quite replicate that first experience, and like, you know, nothing will quite be the same. But like, there are things about remake that celebrate 7 in such a way that it gives me bits and pieces of that first experience. Like some of the music, just like the reorchestration of some of that stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And like, if nothing else, like they appreciate and they're pumping up these characters in a way that like I wish the original could have. They're doing things that original just wasn't able to do, and it's like, I don't...
Dude, if they flushed out the characters, if they fleshed them out in the way they're doing in the remake, man, that would have been like 6 discs.
Yeah, right? Like, you'd never be able to get it. And like, just having ambient conversation in the background while you're doing stuff. Like, just technological limitations and space limitations aside. But it's like, one thing that I will put my flag in the ground on, and like, the hill that I'm willing to die on, is I can't think of any character in remake that I don't like more than their original version. Like, I think that they've been very respectful and very tasteful with how they've done that stuff. And, like, it feels like being able to hang out with old friends again and finally have these new experiences after years of just having memories.
I agree, and I agree 100%. And when you say that, I guess my mind specifically goes to Jessie for some reason.
Yeah.
Like, it's kind of... It covers all the characters, you know? Like, I they are all fleshed out a little more, and I do like the direction they're all going. I will say, with the caveat of Wedge is kind of, in my opinion, just like comic relief, for lack of a better term.
Wedge was comic relief in the original.
Exactly.
Too,
so, I mean, it is somewhat of an improvement. Whether or not you like Wedge as a character is, I mean, teach his own, right?
Yeah.
Not my favorite character, but Jessie specifically, I mean, she's a good example of how they fleshed out, built upon the character, just kind of make them more approachable.
They made Jessie not only, like, didn't just turn her into a character. They turned her into a character, and through that character, they've beefed up other parts of the world.
Yeah.
Because her dad was an ex-Shinra employee, and she was a dancer that got booked at or an actress.
The Golden Saucer, baby. Yeah.
And, like, her mom lives up on the plate, so we see what that looks like. And she got into planetology after her dad got Mako poisoning, and through that, she finds Avalanche.
Yep.
And, like, you know, she was the bomb maker and the ID forger for the main Avalanche cell, too, before she went into the Splinter group with Barrett. And it's just like, through just beefing up this one character, like, we've learned more about Sector 7, like, what it's like living in Midgar and getting out of Midgar. We've learned more about Avalanche.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, no, it's a good example of how it's fleshed out. And then, I mean, I'm harping on it, but, like, what does Wedge really do? I mean, he's, like... you find him in Deep Ground, like he has cats.
I will go on record as saying that I think that whole segment, like going into Sector 7 after it's been crushed and finding Wedge and doing Deep Ground, I think that's probably the weakest part of Remake.
Agreed.
Like, if I was going to axe anything, I'm like, I don't really need this right now.
It did seem kind of stapled on, but
it's superfluous. I don't know if they chickened out by killing off all of Avalanche. Like, maybe they wanted to give us Wedge. Because, like, I'll be the first to say, like, the death of Avalanche on the pillar was totally softened for me, because you know what's coming if you've played the original. Like,
it still hit hard, dude. Jessie dying on the tower, man, going up the tower and
Jessie and Biggs.
Yeah, it hit hard. It hit hard.
And as a rule, I don't like really drawn out, like, my final words, death scenes.
Same.
But I was like, you know, that's sad. But in the original, it's just like Wedge fucking falls out of the sky and is like, bleh, I'm dead.
Right? Yeah, like 30 stories. You're just like, oh, okay.
And then you're just like, oh, fuck. Like, this is happening now.
Yeah.
Like, it's getting real. Like, you're killing off main characters.
Yeah, and I mean, that's definitely something to be said right there, is, like, the Whispers saved Wedge when he fell, right? In the remake, so it's just, there's just...
Yeah, and they were lingering over both Jessie and Biggs, too. And then in the post-credit stinger scene, it seems implied that at least Biggs survived.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm like, I don't necessarily know if I love that. Like...
They didn't do too much with Biggs. No. Specifically, so I'm thinking they might kind of build him up a little more in the in Rebirth, but we'll see about that. I mean, that'll be a conversation for a different episode right there.
True.
You know?
But for your point about Wedge, like, I agree. I think that, like, he's there, rounding it out. His character is that he is fat and he likes cats.
Yeah, exactly, right?
He likes pizza.
He's the jokester. He's the jokester of the group. 100%.
He's definitely like the heart. He's like the innocent one, you know.
And it was kind of true in the OG, you know. I think about, like, Wedge and Biggs, and they're really there just to kind of introduce you to Avalanche, give you kind of more personality to the group, but then they're just killed off. You know, then they're just gone.
And, like,
that's something Barrett holds on to the entire game, because even when you go to the Gold Saucer, he's like, you know, we're doing this for the planet, we're doing this for Biggs and Wedge and everyone who died for our cause, you know. So it's like they do still have their part. Yeah,
I agree, and, like, I thought that was useful, like, for the story. But it's like, after a while, I kind of forgot about Biggs, Wedge, and Jessie. But it's like, anyone who's playing the remake, you're never going to forget. You're traumatized now.
Yeah, exactly. And that's one of the reasons I think it hits so hard, is when you see Jessie die on the pillar going up, you know, you're just like, you see, there's so much time that you spent around her, breaking into her house, stealing her father's shit.
There's, like, not only, like, you know that Jessie has dreams and she wants to do more than this, but it's like she's fallen into this life because of what happened to her dad. And then the context that they do not harp on is, like, you fail to stop the Sector 7 plate from falling. Her parents are fucking dead.
Yeah,
like,
that's
her
true.
Mom who made you that pizza and her dad who was asleep in that bed are totally paced.
Gone. Yeah.
So, like, and, like, that sucks, but I think that that's valuable. That's the type of, like, pain and realness that you get from consequences in a video game like this that you want to hang on to. Cloud is the only person in the party who survives and went up to Sector 7. Like, Cloud is the only one who could put that together.
Yeah.
But he's just so emotionally reserved that, like, Cloud can't even grieve these, like, losses. Jesse and Biggs, like, you could see that it's cracking him. Like, he's doing his best to, like, he's, like, holding Biggs' hand. And Biggs is like, there's just one more thing. There's this, like, orphanage out in Sector 5 with these kids.
Yeah.
And that I try to do my best for them. And Cloud's like, you'll just have to, like, you have to do that yourself. Like, you can't die. And Biggs is just like, why? You and those kids have so much in common. And Cloud just, like, doesn't know what to do with that. Like, his face is just, like, trying to emote and trying to, like, hold it back at the same time. And it's like, that's that mocap. And that's that voice acting.
Yeah.
And it's like he never really gave Biggs the time of day. Like, they weren't buddies. They had such few interactions. But now he's been to the Leaf House, and he's met those kids. Mm-hmm. He's met Aerith and Miss Gloria, I think her name is.
Yep.
And, like...
The honeybee and dancer.
Yeah. Look, teaching sucks in both worlds. But, like, he never had a chance to talk to Biggs about that. And, like, he's now seeing, like... He pushed them away for all these purposes, and now they're gone, and there's so much more that he could have talked to Jesse about, and so much more he could have talked to Biggs about. And it's like, that's sick. Like, that's just good storytelling right there.
Agreed. Yeah, agreed 100%.
So, like, in so much as, I like those characters better than the original, because obviously they each had, like, 6 lines in the original. Like, I also like what they're doing for all the other characters and the world. Like, I think that's spectacular. Yeah. How they didn't have to create new characters to do this. Cough, cough, Leslie, cough, cough, Kyrie.
Well, those were technically characters from before, right? They are technically canonical.
We will cover the novels at some point, maybe.
Yeah, I'll have to read them.
That'll be a project. We'll do it together. We'll see if there's an audiobook.
Yeah, no, that'll be. But I think this was a good stopping point for the first episode here. And,
I agree.
I think we covered the large majority. I mean, that's kind of encapsulating story and characters. I mean, growing up, Barrett was my favorite, and just kind of it was just enjoyable. Nostalgia's a hell of a drug. So I mean, your first impressions of OG versus your first impressions of remake is like, again, I mean, there's so much bias in our lives where I don't think we would be able to have a kind of fresh interpretation of OG without having some sort of influence, fresh interpretation of remake without having an influence from OG.
Yeah,
and that kind of funnels into the idea that you can never really experience remake without experiencing OG.
Well, I think. This will be a larger conversation about, like, remakes in video games in general, or even in movies for that matter. But, like, when you're looking at remaking a game, especially one with as much prestige and as much legacy as 7, like, you have to commit at the beginning. You have to choose. Are you going to try to recapture that original experience? And maybe if you're lucky, people who are playing this will get to re-feel what they felt the first time, or you get to give that experience to a whole new generation of people. Or do you make a remake that leverages that original experience and expects people to remember that and lets you have something entirely new by building on what you already had? And I think that clearly Final Fantasy VII is going for the latter.
Yeah.
And, like, other things like, this is maybe a weak example, but it's like I played the Spyro the Dragon remakes and, like, the Crash Bandicoot remakes. And it's like, those are totally, like, trying to recapture that original experience.
Trying to be fan service.
Yeah, and it's like, that was fun. Like, I liked it. And it's like, people who never got to play those originals because they're on ancient hardware now. Well, it's great. But it's like, it didn't make me feel anything new. I was like, oh, yeah, this level. And I'm like, that's cool. But, like, 7 Remake gives me these moments where, I just spoke at length about just, like, the new Avalanche members, where I'm just like, you didn't just reignite this like long, cold emotion within me. Like, you know, I didn't go about the rest of my life thinking about Biggs and Wedge and Jesse. But it's like, not only did you get to bring back those memories, you added to them. Like, there's more there now. And, like, I totally understand. Like, I get it. If that's not your experience, if you feel like, you know, you grew up with 7 and you just had these characters in your head for so long, and now this is trying to overwrite that and you're not into it, like, totally get it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, I totally agree. Because it really is such a good... I mean, it's almost better than I think I would have ever expected, you know, because so much of the conversation before Remake came out was just like, how are they going to create the same thing again? That was kind of like the big talking point. How are they going to create the same game again? And everyone was just like, there's so much contention as far as like, they're going to ruin the game, they're going to change it in different directions, Aerith is going to be completely different, like they're just going to stop her from dying. They're going to stop Black Materia from, like, existing. Or there was a million theories as to why they were going to ruin it. But I don't think many people were expecting such an expansion on what we already knew, you know? And to a fault, right? Like, there's some things, like I said, Deep Ground feels a little kind of just, like, tacked on there at some point. But
for those Dirge of Cerberus fans.
Yeah, but if you know the timeline of Final Fantasy, if you know more about the game than what Remake provides, it makes sense.
Yeah.
And so I think there's definitely, as far as first experiences go with OG, I mean, there's that level of nostalgia. Nostalgia's a hell of a drug. Yeah. And then your first experience with Remake is just, mine was so good.
I was just like,
so good.
Controller in one hand, phone in the other, just being like, oh, it looks so fucking cool. Oh
and they're just like, going on the expansion, there's just so many things you wouldn't think about. Because like Sector 7, you don't think about the lights above it that are like that are replicating the sun.
The sun lamps.
Yeah, you don't think about that in the OG at all. You're just like, I'm under a plate and everything is light. Everything looks good.
Or people will pay a premium, even though they're all poor, for these fucking water filters that Jesse makes, and that's how Avalanche makes their money, because like everything smells like sulfurous, reconstituted, like it's probably the water from up there that's just been cleaned and recycled down here. So everything smells like ass. And like everyone stinks because you're taking showers in that and you're covered in trash all the time. Yeah. Like being in the slums sucks. Like it blows. Like no wonder there's like guerrilla activity down there.
Yeah. But I mean, with that said, I like first impressions so far have been phenomenal for Remake, and there's nothing but to expect improvement in Rebirth so far. Judging from the trailers, like only expecting better things.
Yeah. I think the only criticism I've seen of Remake that like kind of keeps coming back to me, especially as I replay it, is like there are definitely sections that are like really spread out, and the addition of side quests is seen as like padding. And people really liked the brisk pace of 7 Original through Midgar. Yeah. I would say that the obvious meta answer to that is that it's not obviously it is padding. Like you need to make Midgar bookend, like your bookend part 1, and like if you want a AAA game experience, you can't be giving people 10 hours of gameplay for $70.
Agreed.
And like it would also, in my opinion at least, be like cutting short the potential of what you have to do here in a revisitation remake like this. Do I love spending 2 hours in Hojo's fucking lab, splitting the party, going and hitting switches to open new areas? No, not really.
Yeah.
I didn't love climbing the wire in Original or hiding from the guards in Original either. Yeah. Certain things just aren't going to land with you, but it's like, I don't mind the side quests. I'm not crazy about the kids at the Leaf House. Like, they're not my favorite addition to the story. But I do like... Yeah, there we go.
Gonna need to change this.
It's true. Or just put the mouse on the table so that when we gesticulate and move it around, it will constantly be jiggling. Oh, God.
Ooh. But I think this is a good stopping point for the first kind of episode here.
I agree.
You know, I think we've touched on the large majority of things. You know, unless there's anything else that you feel like you want to add as far as your first impressions versus OG versus your first impressions of remake. You know, personally, I guess I'll take the first word here. I mean, the first impression of OG was just such a big part of my life. You know, I felt like I learned so much from the game, whereas I think remake was the perfect expectation of the perfect game as far as what I could have ever expected.
Yeah.
Because if it was truly a 1-for-1 remake, it would have just been a trip down memory lane that I go on every year. You know, I play Final Fantasy 7 OG at least once a year.
Yeah.
Now it's kind of turning towards playing remake as well. And I don't feel like it would have been satisfying if I was just playing the same thing again. You know, it wouldn't have felt like the same game. The levels of expansion they've added into remake, and I assume that they'll add into Rebirth, is just like, it's intoxicating. It really does let you get into that game again.
Yeah.
You know?
I agree. And honestly, like, my first impression of original was like, it was just this, like, the word epic is overused a lot, but I mean it in like the classical sense. It was this saga, this long story with complex characters that grow in this world that's huge, so much bigger than the crummy city that you start out in. And like, you know, when I played it, it was trying to support the burden of these expectations that I'd had for a decade on top of it. And, you know, I would say that it did live up to that. And then by the time I had played 7, you know, people have been talking about 7 Remake or like the dream of one for so long.
Yeah.
That when it materialized, it's like that pressure, that legacy was doubled because now I'd already, you know, I'd played the whole thing too. And then I played Remake and it was like a celebration of 7. It was like going to a carnival that was Final Fantasy 7 themed.
Yeah.
And like just so much love and dedication to just like taking this story and these characters and just dressing them up and putting on all the lights and just putting all the budget behind it. Like everything that this story could ever want or deserve.
Yeah.
And like if you're not into remake, like if it just completely stomps on your nostalgia, like I'll never fight you on that. Like that's legit. But like for me, I think that this was the best thing that they could have done with that nostalgia in the most respectful way.
Agreed. Yeah, agreed 100%. And I guess with that, we'll end
we'll
episode
wrap
1
episode
here.
1.
Yeah, so
Gongaga Radio.
Yeah, appreciate anyone who tuned in. I'm Max.
I'm Kevin.
And have a fantastic rest of your day.
Sick.